The city of Boston in the year 1871 was a place of proud history and bustling industry, a beacon of American progress. Yet beneath the surface of this civilized society, in the working-class districts of South Boston and Chelsea, a peculiar and unsettling fear began to take root. It was a fear that did not come from the known dangers of the adult world, the drunken brawls or the cutthroat industries, but from the seemingly safe world of childhood itself. The first whispers spoke of a boy torturer, a phantom who preyed exclusively on young boys. The source of this creeping terror was a youth named Jesse Harding Pomeroy. He was born on the 29th of November, 1859, in Charlestown, Massachusetts. His early life was marked by hardship. His father was known to be a violent alcoholic, and his mother struggled to provide stability. From his earliest years, Jesse was set apart by a physical defect that would define his interactions with the world. His right eye was covered by a thick, milky white cataract, giving him a vacant, unsettling stare that drew taunts and suspicion. He was a loner, a quiet boy who preferred the violent, sensational tales in dime novels to the company of his peers. The attacks began in the autumn of 1871. The pattern was always the same. A young boy, usually between the ages of 6 and 8, would be lured to an isolated spot, a remote beach, a deserted boathouse, a patch of scrubland. The perpetrator was always described as a big boy with a strange dead eye. What followed was not a simple beating, it was a ritual of cruelty. The victims were stripped, bound, and subjected to horrific torture. They were whipped with ropes, cut with knives and pins, and bitten. The assailants seemed to derive a strange sexual pleasure from the infliction of pain. The city's newspapers began to report on the boy torturer of Boston, and a palpable panic spread through the neighborhoods. Parents kept their children close, and the police were under immense pressure to find the fiend. The break in the case came almost by chance. On the 20th of September, 1872, a young victim named Joseph Kennedy was at the South Boston police station when he happened to glance out a window. His blood ran cold. Staring back at him was the unmistakable face of his tormentor, the boy with the dead eye. He immediately alerted the officers. Jesse Pomeroy, just 12 years old, was arrested on the spot. He offered no resistance and calmly confessed to a series of attacks. Other victims were brought in, and they all identified him without hesitation. The mystery was solved. The monster was a child. The city breathed a collective, if uneasy, sigh of relief. Jesse Pomeroy stood before a juvenile court judge, confessed his crimes, and was sentenced to the State Reform School for Boys in Westboro. The sentence was for a period of 6 years. It was a punishment meant to correct and rehabilitate. The case was considered closed. The boy torturer was safely locked away, and Boston could return to its normal life. But this was a delusion. The system, in its desire for order, had profoundly underestimated the darkness it had caged. The true horror was not yet awake. It was merely dormant, waiting for an opportunity to break out and escalate into something far, far worse. The city believed the nightmare was over, but the justice system, swayed by good behavior and a mother's pleas, was about to make a catastrophic error. The boy torturer would be returned to the streets, and his compulsions would soon demand the ultimate price. To follow the terrifying descent from torture to murder, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of the chilling revelation. Jesse Pomeroy's time at the State Reform School was, on the surface, a model of rehabilitation. He was quiet, obedient, and caused no trouble.
His mother, Ruth Ann Pomeroy, tirelessly campaigned for his release, convinced her son was a victim of circumstance who had been cured. Her pleas, combined with official recommendations based on his good behavior, proved successful. In February of 1874, after serving less than 2 years of his 6-year sentence, the 14-year-old Jesse was released on parole and returned to his mother's home in South Boston. It was a decision that would echo through Boston's history as one of its most tragic failures. The Pomeroy family was attempting a fresh start. Ruth Ann ran a small dressmaking shop at 327 Broadway Street, and Jesse helped his older brother run a newsstand out of the same location. For a few short weeks, an uneasy normalcy prevailed. But the compulsions that had driven Jesse to torture were not extinguished. They had been festering in the sterile environment of the reform school, growing stronger and more sinister. Now, back in the city, with the taste of freedom and access to new victims, those compulsions were about to erupt with homicidal force. The first tragedy struck on the 18th of March, 1874. A 10-year-old girl named Catherine Curran left her home in South Boston to buy a notebook. Witnesses saw her enter the Pomeroy's shop. She was never seen alive again. When she failed to return home, a massive search was launched, but it yielded nothing. The Pomeroy shop was searched, and Jesse was questioned, but without a body, there was no evidence of a crime. Katie Curran had simply vanished, and her disappearance became a painful, unsolved mystery. Then, on the 22nd of April, 1874, the horror returned in a way that shattered all illusions. A 4-year-old boy named Horace Millen was lured away from his South Boston neighborhood by a bigger boy. Later that afternoon, his mutilated body was discovered on the marshes of Dorchester Bay. The scene was one of unparalleled brutality. The little boy was nearly decapitated, his throat slashed from ear to ear. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and stomach, and his body showed signs of post-mortem mutilation. The savagery was so extreme, it was clear to all who saw it that the perpetrator was not just a troubled youth, but a creature of pure, unadulterated evil. The city's memory was long. Immediately, the police detectives' thoughts turned to the one person capable of such an act, Jesse Pomeroy. They went to his mother's shop and took the 14-year-old boy into custody. The evidence, while circumstantial, was compelling. Witnesses had seen a boy matching Pomeroy's description with Horace Millen. When arrested, Pomeroy had fresh scratches on his hands and what appeared to be blood on his clothing. Faced with this, Pomeroy confessed to the murder of Horace Millen. The city was thrown into an uproar. The boy torturer had now become the boy murderer. But the nightmare was not over. The disappearance of Katie Curran was suddenly remembered. With public outrage now directed at the Pomeroy family, Ruth Ann was forced to close her shop. In July, new tenants purchased the building and began to remodel the basement. They immediately noticed a foul odor. On the evening of July 18th, workmen discovered the carefully concealed body of Katie Curran, buried under a heap of ashes in the cellar. She had been slain in the basement of the Pomeroy shop, her throat cut. Confronted with this grisly discovery, Jesse Pomeroy confessed to her murder as well. The monster had not just been loose, he had been living and working among them, and his mother's shop had become a charnel house. The question was no longer who, but what. What does a society do with a 14-year-old boy who has committed the most monstrous acts imaginable?
Jesse Pomeroy's time at the State Reform School was, on the surface, a model of rehabilitation. He was quiet, obedient, and caused no trouble. His mother, Ruth Ann Pomeroy, tirelessly campaigned for his release.
convinced her son was a victim of circumstance who had been cured. Her pleas, combined with official recommendations based on his good behavior, proved successful. In February of 1874, after serving less than 2 years of his 6-year sentence, the 14-year-old Jesse was released on parole and returned to his mother's home in South Boston. It was a decision that would echo through Boston's history as one of its most tragic failures. The Pomeroy family was attempting a fresh start. Ruth Ann ran a small dressmaking shop at 327 Broadway Street, and Jesse helped his older brother run a newsstand out of the same location. For a few short weeks, an uneasy normalcy prevailed. But the compulsions that had driven Jesse to torture were not extinguished. They had been festering in the sterile environment of the reform school, growing stronger and more sinister. Now, back in the city, with the taste of freedom and access to new victims, those compulsions were about to erupt with homicidal force. The first tragedy struck on the 18th of March, 1874. A 10-year-old girl named Catherine Curran left her home in South Boston to buy a notebook. Witnesses saw her enter the Pomeroy shop. She was never seen alive again. When she failed to return home, a massive search was launched, but it yielded nothing. The Pomeroy shop was searched, and Jesse was questioned, but without a body, there was no evidence of a crime. Katie Curran had simply vanished, and her disappearance became a painful, unsolved mystery. Then, on the 22nd of April, 1874, the horror returned in a way that shattered all illusions. A 4-year-old boy named Horace Millen was lured away from his South Boston neighborhood by a bigger boy. Later that afternoon, his mutilated body was discovered on the marshes of Dorchester Bay. The scene was one of unparalleled brutality. The little boy was nearly decapitated, his throat slashed from ear to ear. He had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest and stomach, and his body showed signs of post-mortem mutilation. The savagery was so extreme, it was clear to all who saw it that the perpetrator was not just a troubled youth, but a creature of pure, unadulterated evil. The city's memory was long. Immediately, the police detectives' thoughts turned to the one person capable of such an act: Jesse Pomeroy. They went to his mother's shop and took the 14-year-old boy into custody. The evidence, while circumstantial, was compelling. Witnesses had seen a boy matching Pomeroy's description with Horace Millen. When arrested, Pomeroy had fresh scratches on his hands and what appeared to be blood on his clothing. Faced with this, Pomeroy confessed to the murder of Horace Millen. The city was thrown into an uproar. The boy torturer had now become the boy murderer. But the nightmare was not over. The disappearance of Katie Curran was suddenly remembered. With public outrage now directed at the Pomeroy family, Ruth Ann was forced to close her shop. In July, new tenants purchased the building and began to remodel the basement. They immediately noticed a foul odor. On the evening of July 18th, workmen discovered the carefully concealed body of Katie Curran, buried under a heap of ashes in the cellar. She had been slain in the basement of the Pomeroy shop, her throat cut. Confronted with this grisly discovery, Jesse Pomeroy confessed to her murder as well. The monster had not just been loose, he had been living and working among them, and his mother's shop had become a charnel house. The question was no longer who, but what. What does a society do with a 14-year-old boy who has committed the most monstrous acts imaginable? The crimes are unspeakable. The killer is caught. But the real drama is just beginning. The trial of the century looms, pitting the demand for justice against the unsettling mystery of a child's corrupted mind. The court will become a stage for a profound debate about evil, sanity, and punishment. To witness the dramatic legal battle that would captivate a nation, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The trial of Commonwealth v. Pomeroy began on the 9th of December 1874 in the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. The entire nation watched, gripped by the macabre spectacle of a child being tried for the most adult of crimes. Jesse Pomeroy, now a pale and quiet 14-year-old, sat in the courtroom, the focus of every gaze. The prosecution, led by the Attorney General, argued for a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree for the killing of Horace Millen. The evidence was overwhelming: the confessions, the eyewitness accounts, the physical evidence. The defense, faced with a near impossible task, mounted an insanity defense. They argued that Pomeroy was not in his right mind, that he suffered from a profound mental illness that rendered him incapable of controlling his murderous impulses. Doctors were called to the stand who testified about Pomeroy's strange behaviors, his feelings in his head, and his apparent blackout periods. The defense painted a picture of a boy who was himself a victim of a broken brain, of a cruel father's abuse, and of the violent dime novels that had poisoned his imagination. They contended he was a moral imbecile, unable to comprehend the wickedness of his acts. The prosecution, however, countered with its own experts who asserted that Pomeroy knew the difference between right and wrong, the legal standard for insanity at the time. They pointed to the calculated nature of his crimes, the luring of victims, the selection of isolated spots, the meticulous concealment of Katie Kern's body. This was not the random violence of a madman, they argued, but the premeditated acts of a cunning and sadistic criminal. The jury was left to weigh the most complex of questions. Can a child be a monster? Is evil born, or is it made? The trial was swift. On the 10th of December, after just 2 days of testimony, the jury returned with its verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree. Jesse Pomeroy became the youngest person in the history of Massachusetts to be convicted of first-degree murder. Yet in a remarkable twist that reflected the deep societal unease with executing a child, the jury added a recommendation for mercy on account of his youth. This placed the ultimate decision squarely in the hands of the judge and the state's executive branch. In February of 1875, Judge Horace Gray formally sentenced Jesse Pomeroy to death by hanging. The sentence, however, required the governor to sign the death warrant. This initiated a prolonged and bitter political and ethical battle that would last for a year and a half. Governor William Gaston, profoundly troubled by the idea of sending a boy to the gallows, refused to sign the warrant. The only legal way to spare Pomeroy's life was through the Massachusetts Governor's Council, which needed a simple majority to commute the sentence to life imprisonment in solitary confinement. The council voted 3 times. The first 2 votes upheld the execution, and both times Governor Gaston refused to comply, creating a constitutional stalemate. The public and the press were divided. Some saw Pomeroy as an inhuman fiend who deserved the ultimate punishment. Others saw a mentally ill child for whom death was a barbaric and unjust conclusion. Finally, in August of 1876, the council took a third, anonymous vote, and Pomeroy's sentence was commuted to life in prison in solitary confinement. The compromise was a uniquely harsh one. He would live, but he would be entombed within the state's prison system, cut off from all human contact forever. On the evening of September 7, 1876, a 16-year-old Jesse Pomeroy was transferred from the Suffolk County Jail to the state prison at Charleston to begin his life in solitary. The heavy iron door of his cell clanged shut, sealing him away from the world.
The legal drama was over, but the story of Jesse Pomeroy was far from finished. The boy who had terrorized Boston was now a ghost in the system, but he would find ways to make his presence known for decades to come. The gavel has fallen, and the cell door has locked. But what becomes of a boy monster as he grows into a man within the stone walls of a prison? His mind, as cunning and relentless as ever, would now turn its energies towards a new goal: survival, escape, and a decades-long battle against the state that caged him. The story continues deep within the prison's solitary wing. To follow the incredible saga of America's most famous convict, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The cell in the Charlestown State Prison was Jesse Pomeroy's entire world. For 41 years, he lived in complete isolation, his universe reduced to the narrow confines of stone and iron. His only regular human interactions were with the guards who brought his meals and the prison physician who checked on him. The chaplains visited occasionally, and for 25 years, his most steadfast link to the outside world, his mother, Ruth Ann, came to see him once a month until her death. This was a punishment designed to be a living death, an attempt to erase the boy fiend from human memory. But Pomeroy's mind refused to be extinguished. Denied normal human contact, he turned inward and embarked on a ferocious campaign of self-education. He read every book in the prison library, devouring works on history, philosophy, and science. Then he taught himself algebra, geometry, and an astonishing array of languages, including Latin, Greek, Hebrew, German, and French. One visiting psychiatrist noted that he had learned German with considerable accuracy. He began writing poetry and philosophical pieces, arguing stubbornly with prison officials for his right to have them published. This was not the picture of a brutish, unthinking monster. It was the portrait of a sharp, determined, and relentlessly focused intellect trapped in a cage of its own making. This intellectual energy was matched by an equally powerful, almost primal drive for freedom. Pomeroy became infamous among prison officials for his relentless and ingenious escape attempts. A psychiatric report from 1914 noted that Pomeroy had made 10 or 12 determined attempts to flee. His ingenuity was unprecedented in the history of the prison. He managed to conceal and craft tools from the most mundane materials. Guards frequently found handmade drills, ropes fabricated from scraps, and steel pens sharpened into weapons hidden in his cell or on his person. In one of his most daring attempts, Pomeroy managed to redirect a gas pipe in his cell, planning to cause an explosion that would blow open his cell door. The plan worked, to a point. The explosion did break the door open, but the force of the blast also knocked Pomeroy unconscious, leaving him lying amidst the wreckage of his own failed ambition when the guards arrived. In another attempt, he lost the sight in his one good eye, further isolating him from the world he so desperately wanted to rejoin. These attempts were not the actions of a reformed man. They were the struggles of a caged animal, a testament to a will that would not be broken, even by decades of solitude.
As the years turned into decades, Pomeroy's physical form changed. The boy became a man, and the man grew old. His back became bent from the confines of his cell. His head grew bald, and his body weakened. Yet his mind remained acutely focused on one goal: freedom. He studied law books and spent decades composing legal challenges to his conviction and countless petitions for a pardon.
He became a fixture in the governor's office. Over the course of his imprisonment, a total of 22 different governors would refuse his pleas for release. He was a living relic, a permanent, troubling reminder of a forgotten crime, and no governor was willing to bear the political responsibility of setting him free. The world outside his cell was transforming at a dizzying pace. The 19th century gave way to the 20th. The horse and carriage were replaced by the automobile, and men took to the skies in airplanes. Inside the Charleston prison, time stood still. Jesse Pomeroy remained, a living fossil from a different era. His only connection to the modern world, the books and newspapers that were passed through his cell door. The boy torturer was now grandpa to the other inmates, a legendary figure they rarely saw but often whispered about. His story was largely forgotten by the public, but his presence in the system was a constant, low-grade fever that would not break. He was entombed but not forgotten, silenced but never quiet. For 41 years, he plotted, studied, and waited. Then, in a shocking twist, the world finally decided to open the tomb. What happens when a man who has lived in solitary since the age of 16 is suddenly thrust into the light of the modern world? The final act of this lifelong drama is about to begin. To see how the story of America's longest-serving prisoner concludes, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the final chapter.
In 1917, in a move that surprised many, the Massachusetts Governor's Council commuted Pomeroy's sentence to the extent of allowing him the privileges afforded to other life prisoners. After 41 years in solitary confinement, the 57-year-old man was suddenly permitted to leave his cell, work in the prison shops, and talk with other inmates. At first he resisted, having become so institutionalized that the prospect of change was terrifying, and he still wanted nothing less than a full pardon. Eventually, however, he adjusted to his new circumstances. The man once known as the Boy Fiend was now Grandpa Pomeroy, who wrote poems and philosophical pieces for the prison magazine and even appeared in a prison minstrel show. He sold war bonds during World War I and, in a bizarre twist, even speculated in the stock market from his cell. The world had changed beyond all recognition, and in 1929, an elderly and frail Pomeroy was transferred from Charlestown to the Bridgewater Hospital for the criminally insane. For the first time in 43 years, he was driven outside the prison walls. The experience was overwhelming. He saw his first automobile, his first steam shovel, his first skyscraper, and an airplane in flight. He was given an ice cream cone and a bottle of ginger ale, novelties from a new world. Reporters noted that the new sights and sounds left him almost speechless. His only question was a poignant echo from his past. Aren't there any more horses? The man who had been locked away during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant was now living in the era of Herbert Hoover. But the old instincts never fully died. Even at Bridgewater, jailers found saw blades and other tools in his possession, evidence that the desire for escape, the defining drive of his life, still flickered within him. He had spent nearly 6 decades behind bars, and the weight of that experience had finally broken his spirit. He drew back into his shell, became uncommunicative, and remained aloof from the other inmates. The glimpse of the world he had been denied for so long had come too late. Jesse Harding Pomeroy died of natural causes at Bridgewater on September 29, 1932. He was 72 years old. In his pocket when he died was the sum of $1.60, his entire worldly wealth. The mystery of why Jesse Pomeroy committed his atrocities did not die with him. In his own time, explanations varied wildly. Some doctors and newspapers theorized that his pregnant mother had been frightened by a visit to a slaughterhouse, imprinting violence on the fetus, a theory rooted in superstition rather than science. Others, including the prosecutors at his trial, blamed the violent dime novels he read, seeing them as a corrupting influence on a susceptible mind. Many pointed to the abuse he suffered at the hands of his alcoholic father as the root cause of his sadism. Modern scholars have revisited the case with new perspectives. Some disagree with the abuse narrative, arguing there is little direct evidence for it. Instead, they put forth a compelling medical theory that Pomeroy suffered a devastating reaction to a smallpox vaccination he received as an infant during a Boston epidemic. Following the vaccination, his body was covered in blisters and abscesses for months, leaving him in constant pain and unable to be held or comforted during a critical developmental stage. This, they argued, disrupted his ability to form attachments and empathy, creating the psychopath who would later torture and kill. His actions also eerily echoed the torture scenes from the dime novels he loved, suggesting he was acting out the brutal fantasies he consumed. Ultimately, the case of Jesse Pomeroy forces us to confront the darkest questions about human nature. Was he a monster, simply born evil? Or was he a product of a perfect storm of biological predisposition, psychological trauma, and environmental influences? His story is a stark reminder that the line between us and them is frighteningly thin. He was not a supernatural fiend, but a human being, a fact that makes his actions all the more terrifying. He was America's youngest serial killer, a boy who became a living ghost, and a man who spent his life as a symbol of the evil that even a child can harbor. His long dark shadow continues to challenge our understanding of crime, punishment, and the enigmatic depths of the human psyche. The story of Jesse Pomeroy is a journey into the heart of darkness, a 100-year-old mystery that continues to resonate. It challenges our definitions of evil and forces us to look at the monsters among us, not as demons, but as human beings gone terribly wrong. If you were drawn to the deepest mysteries of the human condition, to the stories that linger at the edge of understanding, then your search for the unexplained continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the darkest corners of history and the human mind.
The case of Jesse Harding Pomeroy did not conclude with his death. It simply entered the realm of legend, becoming a dark footnote in the annals of American crime. His story, however, left an indelible mark on the legal and penal systems, forcing a society to grapple with concepts it was scarcely equipped to handle. The boy fiend became a precedent, a cautionary tale that echoed through the courtrooms and prison halls for generations to come. His most immediate legacy was legal. Pomeroy's case set a profound precedent for the sentencing of juvenile offenders. He was the youngest person in Massachusetts history to be convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The public and legal debate over his fate directly contributed to a national conversation about the culpability of children. While it would take many more decades for the modern juvenile justice system to evolve, the moral quandary presented by a 14-year-old killer forced lawmakers and the public to consider that a child could be something other than a miniature adult, either less responsible due to immaturity, or, in Pomeroy's case, so fundamentally broken as to be irredeemable. Within the penal system, his name became synonymous with the limits of solitary confinement. His 41 years in isolation stood as a grim record, a real-world experiment in the effects of complete social deprivation. Prison officials and early psychiatrists studied him,
noting both his intellectual adaptations and his relentless, almost psychotic drive to escape. His case became a powerful argument used by both sides of the penal reform debate. Some saw it as proof that even the most vicious criminal could be controlled and that the mind could survive, if not thrive, in isolation. Others saw it as a testament to the unique cruelty of the punishment, a form of psychological torture that fostered madness rather than repentance. Culturally, Jesse Pomeroy became an archetype. He was the original bad seed, a real-life figure who challenged the Victorian ideal of childhood innocence. Before him, the concept of a child as a cold-blooded, sadistic murderer was almost unthinkable. After him, it became a terrifying possibility that society had to acknowledge. His story influenced popular culture, providing a template for fictional child monsters in literature and later in film. The trope of the unsettling, evil child that would become so prevalent in the 20th century can trace one of its darkest roots back to the boy with the dead eye in Boston. The enduring enigma of why he did it ensures his story's longevity. The contemporary theories, parental abuse, the influence of dime novels, or a congenital defect, reflect the limited scientific understanding of the late 19th century. The modern theory of a catastrophic reaction to a smallpox vaccination offers a compelling, if unprovable, biological explanation. It suggests that a medical intervention intended to save his life may have, in a cruel twist of fate, destroyed his capacity for empathy, setting him on his path of horror. This theory transforms him from mere monster into a tragic figure, a boy whose mind was shattered by a perfect storm of biological and environmental factors beyond his control. Today, the name Jesse Pomeroy is known only to true crime historians and aficionados of the macabre. The buildings where he lived and killed are long gone, and the city of Boston has transformed many times over. But the questions his life posed remain unsettlingly relevant. How do we define evil? How should society handle those who commit unforgivable acts at an age when they are not fully formed? What are the limits of punishment and the possibilities of redemption? Jesse Pomeroy's life is a dark mirror, reflecting back the parts of human nature we most wish to deny. His story is not just a historical account, it is a permanent challenge to our notions of justice, morality, and the very nature of the human soul. The final chapter on Jesse Pomeroy can never truly be written, for his story lives on in the legal precedents he set, the cultural fears he ignited, and the unanswered questions that still haunt us. He remains the ultimate enigma, the child who was a monster, the prisoner who became a scholar, the man who spent a lifetime in a tomb for crimes he committed in his youth. His shadow, though faded, has never entirely disappeared.